by Joe Lunardi, ESPN Bracketologist. Joe, how are you this morning?
I'm fine, fellas. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Terrific to have you on as well. Joe, been following your work on Bracketology for a very long time, so really excited to talk to you. I'm curious, kind of at this point in the season where the resumes are starting to take pretty good shape, but there's still a lot of work to be done before even the regular season ends. What's the challenge at this point in the year of trying to project what the bracket's going to look like?
Sometimes it's as simple as staying awake late at night for late games. You said, Ravi, you've been following a long time. And whenever I hear something like that, the word old comes to mind.
Way to go, Ravi. Now he's never going to come back.
And, well, I mean, I have a wife to neglect, and she reminds me regularly, that I've been doing this a long time. And sometimes she'll just use the word straight out, old, and, other synonyms. No, I mean, look, we're talking about a dynamic process, a very fluid process, in the quote unquote old days when, you'd put up one bracket a week on ESPN.com,
Mm-hmm.
fold your hands and come back and look at it again next Sunday as a snapshot. It was a different way of going about things than is the case today. Now from the first night of the season until the last, I have a 1 to 68 updated seed list based on that day's results. And it kind of requires paying attention, not to every team in the country, but to the top 100 or 120 or so that we're tracking at any one point, because now we're into conference play. So in a quote unquote one bid leagues, those first place teams can change on a day-to-day basis. So, it's far from undoable. Like, obviously it's doable. I do it. A lot of people do it, and a lot of people are really good at it. The biggest challenge for me has always been just making sure to stay current. Because, I've learned the hard way. Once you fall a day or two behind, it's really hard to recreate. And that's when, frankly, you make mistakes, or at least make yourself prone to being off target. So that's a little inside baseball. And, that's what I do for a living for 4 months.
Joe, everybody loves upsets, including me. And, the stories that people remember are those teams that make upset runs, like St. Peter's or Dayton from years ago. If you're kind of looking at the bracket, if it started today, who would be some of those tournament sleepers that you think could make a run based on the way they're playing basketball right now?
I think at the end of the day, there's two kinds of sleepers. There's the St. Peter's out of the blue, out of nowhere sleeper.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, typically, like, I'll call it's primary day, right? On the East Coast, a down ballot team in a major conference,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for the sake of argument, and since I know what area code called me, I'm going to say Nebraska. Okay?
All right.
All right. See, I've been doing this for a while, and let's be honest. No one can pick a St. Peter's in advance,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe a Loyola Chicago, that was 30-2 the year, they rode that great point guard play from Sister Jean all the way to the Final Four. Anybody who'd seen them knew they were really good basketball team. But like, we're going to have a team or two in the Final Four Now, last year it happened to be Florida Atlantic and San Diego State that caught people off guard. I would put Florida Atlantic in kind of the Loyola Chicago category, because if you had seen them last year in Conference USA, now in the American, you'd say, hey, they're good, and they have great guards, and they're experienced. So, sure, they could get on a run. Now, San Diego State, while not in a Power 5 conference, if you will, was in a 4-bid league. So they fall more into the Nebraska category, I think, of, a down ballot team that, maybe got hot at the right time. Now, can Nebraska be that team this year? Can Indiana State be that team in the St. Peter's category, or Grand Canyon? It's not out on a limb to talk about Princeton. I mean, they've only lost one game, and they were in the Sweet 16 last year as a 15, right? Beating, I want to say Missouri or Arizona and then Missouri, I think. So, somebody's going to win 2 games that first weekend that nobody's talking about. So I tend to look at teams, that are older, that maybe have great guards, have some experience in tight spots. And, my own kind of personal bias in these things is I look at teams that have posted some big wins away from home. Because unless they change the rules back, you're not playing any home games in the tournament. And you're going to ask me, what does Nebraska have to do? And I'm going to say they have to pick up a couple road games here and there in the league, because unless they do that, they're going to stay at 500. And, that means they're on the bubble.
We're talking with Joe Lunardi, ESPN bracketologist. Joe, well, one of the big narratives this year has kind of been how there's not really a dominant team, how there's, a lot of parity at the top of college basketball this year. You can make that argument, but I also think you can look at kind of the resumes of a UConn and Purdue and say, that though they seem to be pretty clearly a cut above maybe everyone else. As you kind of put together, I know you said you do your seed list 1 through 68 all the time. Like, as you are, where do you see a gap between those two, or do you think there is kind of that parity in the top 20 or so teams in the country that people have been talking about all year?
No, I think there is separation, especially in the case of Purdue. Now, the quote-unquote eye test, if you will, which is, not something that I've ever subscribed to, because it's less and less of the committee's process every year, it seems, from my seat. I think basketball-wise, Purdue and UConn are, I don't want to say a cut above, but, they're on a different rung of the ladder, okay? And in terms of resumes, which is, how we determine seed order, if you will, it's a one-team race. Like, Purdue's resume is historically great for this point of the season. Like, at this point, UConn in the 2 spot is further away from Purdue almost than it is from the beginning of the low 2s and high 3s.
Oh, wow.
Purdue's resume is extraordinary. Now, I'm guessing the folks who went to the game in Lincoln would have a different opinion. But, 7 quad 1 wins, over half of them in what we call quad 1A, which is the top half of quad 1. And that's something that's become an issue in recent years, to try and separate, the best from the very best. if you will. And I mean, quad 1 and quad 2, they're 11-2. No one's close to that.
Yeah.
Their metrics are off the chart, and like they could leave the country for a week and still be the number 1 overall seed.
Joe, you know,
and having been to West Lafayette, you know, perhaps they already have.
Joe, we built our way too early Final Fours. When was that, Ravi? 2 months
November,
ago?
I think.
November?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, better that than July, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, you know, between Ravi and I, it's never too early to pick a Final Four. But, you know,
I know the feeling.
when we drew up our Final Fours, I threw Texas into mine because I really like how they finished last season. I loved what they kind of did in the transfer
They
portal.
added nicely.
Yeah,
sure.
They got Max Asmus. You talk about good guard play. They got Asmus.
Yeah.
What do you think of Texas right now? Because as I'm looking over the bracketology, I don't know, maybe I just skipped over them because I'm looking quickly, but I didn't see
him.
I didn't see Texas on there. And, you know, I was in Vegas this past weekend, and they were 90-1 to win the national title. What do you think of Texas?
Well, I think it's important to note, you know, like in bracketology, like in Caddyshack, there's no gambling at Bushwood. so I don't, you know, I would never say that that's an excellent bet at 90-1. I would clear my throat real loudly. I mean, look, they've underperformed.
Right.
To this point, and I think in today's new bracket, they're all the way up to next 4 out, which means they're between 5 and 8 spots away from the at-large cut line. And their aspirations were certainly much, much greater than that, and still could be. The problem is in that league, I mean, once you're behind the curve, you know, you're fighting a fight every week just to go 1-1.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to do better than that to move up. And I do think they'll ultimately make it and that talent will prevail. But I mean, you know, they might be like 10-11 kind of team. And yeah, they could be the team that gets hot, but too inconsistent for my taste. And, you know, sometimes the whole is not equal to the sum of the parts. And we tend to admire the opposite when teams, quote unquote, overachieve because they appear to be getting the most out of their talent. But, you know, what's still to be learned in this portal era is, you know, sometimes all-star teams aren't very good because they're not the right fit and they haven't grown and played together. You know, I'm not there every day. I don't know. I don't see every minute of every Texas game. I can only go by the results, and the results tell me that, you know, even if they make it, you know, they're not likely to string multiple wins together in the tournament.
We're talking with Joe Lunardi of ESPN, the godfather of bracketology. I think I called you earlier. Joe, I'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about Creighton here. You've got them as a 4 seed in your bracketology that's currently up on ESPN. As you've seen them play this year, and as you kind of look at their schedule and what's left for them in terms of opportunities, what do you think the ceiling is for this Creighton team in terms of seed line?
I do see them a lot. You know, I live outside of Philly, so I have, you know, Villanova and the Big East on the brain a fair amount of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, even without that, let's be honest, the Big East is a pretty compelling story this year all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if we didn't already know, it was proven last week, they're not in UConn's class. They're in the next tier.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's more a statement about UConn than it is about Creighton. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, if Creighton and Marquette played a best of 7 on a neutral court, it would go to the last possession of the 7th game.
Yeah.
I think.
I agree.
And you know, they've been sliding right between the 4 and 5 lines here for the better part of January. I don't think they've been above that or below it. And, what would it take to get a winning streak, right? Because, like, a 4-game winning streak in that league is going to make them a 3 seed. And I think that's probably the ceiling, because they're still going to take some losses. They only play UConn one more time, right? That's at home. Possible win, but they've got other road games that could flip against them. But I see, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I know some of the people and I like them. I think their best basketball is still in front of them. And I don't think that the UConn game was really indicative of who they are. I think UConn had a great night defensively. And, let's face it, Creighton's built to outscore you. And if they're off offensively, they're going to lose by double digits. Because, this is not the 85 Bears defense out there we're talking about.
Joe, it's impossible for Creighton to ever play their first round game in Omaha, but it isn't impossible to think about Nebraska. How realistic do you think that Nebraska could be playing a first round game in Omaha? Like, do you think it's a stroke of luck or it's high probability?
It's almost entirely a stroke of luck at their seed range. If they were a top 3 seed, they would, kind of not control, but they'd have much more influence over their geographic destiny, if you will. And here's the other thing to remember. Like, Omaha, in all likelihood, is going to be the home in the tournament of the Big 12 winner and the Big 12 runner-up. So let's call that a 1 and a 2 seed. Okay? So we know by mere bracketing rules, in the same 4-team grouping with the 1 is going to be an 8, 9, and a 16. Right? So they're not going to be a 16 if they're in. They could be in 8, 9. So that could happen. And then with a 2, it's the same deal, 2, 7, 10, 15. So they could be in that spot, but not if the 1 or a 2 is from the Big 10. Right? Like, they can't be an 8 or a 9 with Purdue.
Right.
And, they can't be a 7 or a 10 with Illinois if Illinois is a 2 or some other big, or Wisconsin's a 2, let's say. So, it would be a stroke of luck. It happens, but it's like, I wouldn't be booking a steak dinner downtown if I were a Nebraska fan.
I mean, you should book a steak dinner downtown.
Anyway,
just
regardless.
For fun. But
well, I'm just saying, like, when I come to Omaha, and I do like Omaha, like, you're not coming for the crab cakes.
I'll tell you what, though, Ravi's got the restaurant for you. We'll send it over your way.
Yeah, next time you're in town, Joe, hit us up. I got a place to send you. For my money, the best place in town. But Joe, so I got to ask you this. We got a few minutes left here with you. This is kind of a pet peeve of mine, and I'm sure you've got more insight to it than I do.
Not my fault. Not my fault.
No, it's not your fault. It's a bone I have to pick with the committee, but I would like your insight on it. So it seems like in the last handful of years, maybe a little bit longer than that, I grew up obviously a Creighton fan in Omaha, and so that was Missouri Valley. The mid-majors are near and dear to my heart. It seems like the committee has shifted away maybe from giving some mid-majors some extra opportunities, and as you mentioned, given some of those down-ballot major conference teams more of those at-large bids. Was that a conscious decision on their part? Is it just kind of how the metrics changed and it favored those teams, or are they just out to get the little guy?
They're not out to get the little guy. I don't believe that.
That was a little tongue-in-cheek, but yeah.
No. But like, I have to be fair, and I'm in a little guy, frame of reference also, in more ways than one. I am taller on TV maybe than in real life, but I do think that and this is going to have to be addressed as we move forward to conferences that are even bigger and bigger. Like, I don't think the world is a better place if at 6-12 in the Big 12, West Virginia makes the tournament.
Exactly.
Or
right. Yeah.
At 7-11, Oklahoma makes the tournament. Like, if there's been any intentional squeezing, like the team sheets completely ignore conferences, which they should, but they also completely ignore conference record, which to me is silly. Because it's 60% of your season. Right. I think how you can now they'll say we treat every team as an independent, blah blah blah, but like that's the same way as saying if we're voting for the Baseball Hall of Fame, we're going to evaluate the Good Glove shortstops the same way we evaluate the slugging left fielders. Right? They're different things. Mm-hmm. And we're looking for different achievements in each category. And all I know is, while each season is its own entity and each team needs to be evaluated that way, if you look over a period of 10 or 15 or 20 years and study it, and hypothetically, I might be the kind of nerd who's done this, I know that, you know, in that 10, 11, 12 seed range, which is where these bubble majors, middling majors, and the second Missouri Valley team, for instance, might fall, mm-hmm. that over a period of years, the high-end mid-majors get half the bids than the middling majors, worse seeding on average, but win twice as often.
Oh. Okay.
And there's a pretty simple reason for that. And it is they're better at basketball. And one of these days, we'll break through the noise and make that known. I think there should be a minimum, like bowl eligibility. I think there should be some standard of tournament eligibility. Mm. And it's already heading south because we're going to have sub 500 teams more and more in their league as leagues get bigger. So let's come up with something else. And it would also add a lot more juice to championship week, but that's the programmer in me, and that's for another time.
No doubt.
That is Joe Lunardi, ESPN bracketologist, preaching to the choir. Give mid-majors more bids.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe, thank you.
See you guys. Thanks.